Let's get more from Yaakov Katz, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. It's good to see you, sir. So one definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Why did the Israeli president take the step again?
Well, I hope it's not because he's insane, John. I think
I'm not implying it is. I'm not implying it is.
Right. No, I know. I'm kidding. I think the reality is such that ultimately, according to the law here in Israel, the president meets after an election with all of the party leaders and hears from them who do they recommend to be the prime minister, to form the governing coalition, right? You need a majority in parliament that's 61 seats to be able to have a ruling government in Israel. And the majority of people, even though it's short of 61, the majority recommended Benjamin Netanyahu, and therefore the president's hands were tied. And you kind of heard in his speech yesterday the anguish that he had and the frustration with doing it again, giving it again to Netanyahu, who has failed in 3 previous elections. The fact that he said, I'm skeptical that there will even be a government after these negotiations that are going to take place over the next few weeks. And the fact that he said Netanyahu's on trial. And I recognize the ethical and moral problem with granting someone who's indicted on severe corruption charges the right to form a government.
I mean, that's the truly new thing about this particular situation. I mean, polarization can be paralysis, but with the prime minister on trial for corruption, how do you see this ending?
Look, Netanyahu's legal troubles have been accompanying Israel throughout these 4 elections, right? We knew in the first election in April 2019 that he was under investigation, then he became indicted, then his trial began with pretrial hearings, and now on Monday was the beginning of the testimonies, and the evidence the prosecution is bringing against him happened to take place the same day that the president was meeting with the party leaders to hear their recommendations. So you had this split-screen moment in Israel where the prime minister is on trial, and at the same time people are recommending that the same man who's on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust be the one to form the government. I think to an extent, Israelis are a bit desensitized by Netanyahu's trial. The fact of the matter is he got 30 seats in this last election, nearly double the party that came in second. Over 1 million Israelis voted for him. So it's not that they think that the trial is something that they should not be voting for him, and therefore he doesn't have a right to serve as prime minister, but it does cause other problems for Israel. Like every decision that he makes, is it because it's good for Israel, or it's good for his political survival, or to help him maybe avoid the trial and the criminal charges against him? That's not a healthy situation for a democracy.
It certainly isn't. I mean, the New York Times had an article heading up to this election asking if Israel's democracy is broken. I mean, you've got the prime minister fighting with the judiciary branch. You've got the prime minister calling this process an attempted coup. To what extent is this something that really does paralyze Israeli democracy? And how do you see the path out of this? Are we headed inevitably to a 5th election?
A 5th election is a definite possibility, and I fear that's looming on the horizon. But I wouldn't say that Israel's democracy is broken. I think we have to look at it differently. Israel's democracy is actually working. Yes, the prime minister is viciously attacking the judiciary, the law enforcement, the prosecution, the justice ministry, the whole justice system. But the fact of the matter is he's on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. He is not above the law. That's an important statement by the Israeli legal system and Israeli democracy. And the second thing is, the fact of the matter is he hasn't been able to form a coalition. And yes, we keep on going to elections, but we keep going to elections because our democratic system works. In other words, if it didn't work, we would have a dictator who would declare, I won, even if he didn't win. Then I would say, you're right, the democratic system is broken. But here we keep on going to an election because democracy is actually working in its full colors and full flair here in Israel.
I guess the final question then is, can the center hold? With this fractured series of parties, is there a centrist coalition that can be formed to restore some stability to the Israeli government?
I wish, I hope, but it doesn't look like that possibility exists, right? Israeli politicians are very much split down this fault line known as yes Bibi, no Bibi, right? Do they want Netanyahu, Bibi being his nickname, or do they not want Netanyahu? And it crosses even ideological lines, right? You have parties on the right who would seemingly be ideologically aligned with Netanyahu, who are against him on a personal level. So we don't have identity politics in Israel, we have personality politics. And therefore, I fear that it will be very difficult for Netanyahu Netanyahu to get a government. The one possibility is if he's able to bring in a small Arab party that's being spoken about a lot that would support his government, because he can only get to 59 with parties on the right that would join him potentially. He would still need to get to 61. The good news there is that even though it's not being done for the right reasons, it's being done just for him to be able to form a government. It's good news for Israel because it means the active participation for the first time potentially of Israeli Arabs in our government. That's important. Israeli Arabs are 20% of Israel's population. That's about 2 million people. They're a minority. Yes, they're in parliament, but they've never been in a governing coalition. And that would be a good thing. It would be a good thing for Israel's democracy, for the health of our country, and for the integration of a minority into the social and political system.
Fascinating. Yaakov Katz, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Thanks for joining us on CNN.
Thank you.